One for you, one for me. This video is going to include a little game in lieu of any type of Subway Surfers footage or Family Guy funny clips or kinetic sand being exploded by bricks of dynamite. Over here you see two glasses, well, one glass, one mug. And the challenge here is for you to pay attention to when they move, because if those mugs move, that means I got thirsty. Now, why would why be such an important question to think about? Why is why so necessary? Why is it so important to talk about? Why? Well, so setting aside the current landscape of economic opportunity, where we exist as a culture in terms of technology, in terms of also just what has come before us as ideas, whether they be ideas of art or other pieces of cultural significance, we are in an era of incredible possibility and access to tools to help actualize these ideas or possibilities has grown immensely just within the last 20 years. And so the fact that anything seems possible should also open the door to recognizing that credence is more necessary than ever. I've been seeing so many people of late, these hustle fluencers or whatever niche word you want to try and call them, trying to spout the same idea of it's better to just make it sloppy and fix it later, or it's better to just go and sprint and not care about the consequences because that's how you get ahead. And it's these types of attitudes that, in my mind, has contributed to this current landscape of content being just so vapid and somewhat worthless or disinteresting. And I'm conflicted by it simply because there is a modicum of truth to not letting your perfectionism stand in the way of putting yourself out there and trying to create what it is you want to create inside of the world. But it also feels like a necessary tool that's just getting thrown to the wayside as a compromise to just what is becoming acceptable to put out. Just the nature of certain content that reaches eyeballs or gets distributed feels ultimately half-fleshed, or there are these ideas that ultimately just leave premature, and you just wonder what could have happened if maybe they had been integrated in some other ways or given time to incubate and then maybe evolve into something that's kind of greater with maybe more perspectives to show than just what the initial idea might entail. Those are the types of things that in my mind are created by credence and a little bit of caution to executing an idea, as opposed to what the culture nowadays is trying to reward, which is just trying to throw stuff at the wall as fast as possible, and in doing that, not really reflecting on the why of it. The why is what makes anything so interesting. It's what necessitates communication in the first place. I'm talking to you for a reason, because you know what? We only have so much time as a resource, so there better be, some type of intent behind why I'm trying to get your attention beyond just the shallow desire for attention in the first place and think you can maybe parlay that into some other type of success down the road. Attention otherwise is quite worthless. But inside of a social media model that increasingly scales all of the rewards to the top of the chain, attention is the sole currency. And so it then becomes the subconscious why to how so many people operate and develop their ideas for consumption in the world. They become less about why is it do I feel that this is a necessary thing to put out there for people to see. Why do I feel it necessary for people to see this? And instead the why becomes a more self-serving, indulgent thing of I'm trying to just get more followers, get more eyeballs. And as such, you get all of these provocateurs proliferating inside of the sphere. These people where they don't really contribute much, if anything, to the culture. You just start rewarding these reactionary parasites who hit on your anger or whatever other type of emotion will rile you up and keep you engaged with their content, because that's the game at the end of the day. It's not about necessarily trying to create stuff to share with the world. It's trying to create stuff to keep your follower count high, to keep your view count high, and that ultimately then justifies your space in the digital landscape. And I think we all agree at this point in time that's an incredibly useless cultural element. So this is why I think so much about the why, even down to, what I create and put out there. It does have an impact on the amount of stuff that you're able to create. And so I understand then why, for many people, it can be such a hard thing to reckon with, because you don't want to be your own obstacle course and trying to fulfill your own destiny or your own desires. But at the same time, we are in this beyond ourselves. We are in this world with other people. And so in trying to communicate to other people, you should at least have some sense of consideration of where they might be coming from, of what they might find interesting, what might be necessary to bring up that maybe no one else has talked about. I mean, that to me is what the value of videos like this is on a landscape like YouTube, and why you have so many people who can get popular off of the same topics for video essays that are getting hammered time and time again, of just, why is it that the shopping malls disappeared? I bet you don't know it's capitalism. Or just these other people who are ultimately approaching the most academically obvious answers to incredibly observable problems. The why is not only an important thing to consider just for you trying to craft the most authentic version of whatever your idea is, but it's also necessary just in trying to create at least the culture that you want to. Because when you start operating on a lack of thought, or just trying to get big, or whatever the other motivators could be on these platforms, you're no longer at the helm of whatever journey you're trying to carve for yourself creatively. You start becoming more beholden to these external factors in something as intimate or as personal as putting yourself out there, that it becomes this, I can't even find the right words. It becomes this disingenuous, unnecessary thing for anyone to put themselves through. But I guess the cloud of it has greater reward than the soulful fulfillment. I don't fucking know. The why is a difficult problem to navigate, especially when we are at this point in time with so much preceding us, that when thinking about the necessity of bringing anything up, you start getting stifled by what has come before you and what you might not know has come before you. And granted, this is a battle that I face time and time again as well. But no matter whatever venue you are jumping into, you are competing no matter what with what has come before you. People, like when I'm performing and such, I am being compared to things that granted are some influences, but at the same time they're also informing that specific person on what my voice is, of what my approach is. Or if I make a movie, people will say, oh, it has hints of this movie blended with this movie. No matter what, you are trying to join that well of the culture. And so you are going to exist within the droplets of everything else that has been made. So it's important to at least have some idea of what is surrounding you in terms of, the specific idea that you're making, what other things have been done somewhat like it. One example I was thinking of is I saw someone who was trying to crowdfund a movie that was going to be a true depiction of bipolar disorder, as an example. And there isn't anything necessarily wrong with making a movie like that, but it feels somewhat ignorant and naive to think that you are going to do that. What, you're not going to do something that Silver Linings Playbook didn't do? Granted, that's not like the best bipolar movie ever, but it's a movie that tried it. You're not going to do something that was already done in Punch Drunk Love. And on top of that, whatever you do, it's going to be in the context of these other movies, whether you like it or not. And so it's important then to know what has come before you, because if anything, that could make your idea better. You know how to stray in a different direction, or how to try and tackle things in ways that might not have reached the popular eyes. The why helps lead you to finding those answers and crafting something that ultimately is going to be more interesting. I feel the why a lot too, especially in the context of comedy, because of just how hard the gates have crashed within the last 20 years. Because when I was growing up, there was a specific circuit and a specific path to reach audiences for comedic things. It used to be that the goal would be to get on something like Comedy Central Presents, or if you were lucky, you get like an HBO special, or just the comedy special in general was this hallmark kind of crowning achievement for your voice inside of the landscape. But, with social media now especially, and of course YouTube too, it's been both beneficial and harmful to just the comedic space as a whole. I think there are tons of comics who have gotten better opportunities because of how the gates have crashed down, and have potentially been able to break through in ways that they might not have been able to as an open micer in like 2005 inside of just the ultimately glib environment of stand-up comedy. But we also have a space that is similarly just trying to throw anything out there without necessarily thinking about how to make it interesting. You have so many deconstructions of things, and I don't think people realize that the more that you deconstruct at a certain point, you're just going to end up playing with a pile of ash. And that's not interesting. It's interesting to do something of a parody. Like being the first person to parody something is like burning the castle down. And at a certain point, the more fires that come after it, you're not going to have any structure left to deconstruct. And you see it with so many things where they just try to tackle these jokes without any of the layered context of what makes them work inside of other situations. Where the joke is just one-pronged. It's focusing on just one specific weird thing as opposed to trying to build it into something that has more moving pieces going around it, because that's what makes comedy work. That's what, in my mind, makes The Simpsons such a gold standard in terms of how to craft jokes, where they'll hit you with a joke that might be somewhat obvious or maybe not necessarily like that gut busting, but because they have you in at that point, that's where then they build it into the zigging and the zagging, the playing with your expectations. It's a specific type of structure that has a comedic effect, and you get that through thought of structure, for one, and of course, that's also been an evolution of just sitcoms from the era before, and from people like Sid Caesar and Steve Allen and the forefathers of late night TV in the first place. But nonetheless, it contributes in that context to building what is interesting, and all of that is also informed by the why, in my mind. If you're trying to make something funny, do you want to just make it baseline funny, or do you want to try and make it as funny as you possibly can? If you are incentivized merely by just trying to throw anything out there as fast as possible, you better hope you're probably the funniest person on the planet, because there's no way you're going to be able to churn enough stuff for that to work. And then you just have a bulk of people who are flooding the comedic landscape with stuff that ultimately is a terrible influence. It's not anything that really well informs anyone who wants to try and get into that stuff. of how to build their comedic voice, or how to build stuff that really is like funny. And it doesn't have to necessarily be inside of the context of what I presented. That's merely just where my voice has been informed, but you have people who have been informed by other things too. And that is part of their why. That's what informs them. And they need to also think about then where it is they want to go with it. A lot of this is ultimately incredibly abstract. It's potentially prudish and snobbish, but I also feel it so strongly, just given we're in a place culturally that just doesn't feel super rewarding, and so it gets frustrating for someone like me, who only puts out so much, to see what else is getting put out there. This ultimately too is a separation in priorities between me and other people. Other people, I think, genuinely do value the clout more than they do the art or whatever it is that they're contributing to. They don't think of it that way. They think of it as trying to have a platform so that way, with people paying attention, that they can keep doing whatever it is that they're doing, if they're even thinking about if they're doing anything beyond just the baseline level of I have to make a sketch a week. It's like, well, what kind of sketches are you making? Are you making stuff that is interesting or not interesting? To me, not interesting is just stuff that's one basic joke that runs through, or it feels ultimately like something that anybody could have done, versus trying to weave it into something that ultimately is of your essence. And that only comes with effort, with time, with consideration, and all of that is part of the why, at least for me. And I feel that at the end of the day, going down that route, we would have much more culturally interesting stuff put out into the world. And we do, by people you have never heard of, by people I have never heard of. And that's also frustrating, to be shouting into ultimately the void like this on stuff that is being solved by people out in the world. Some, like maybe a slim percentage, might have a platform, but the bulk of people do not. And so it's also a game in that way of how is it that we let this cream rise to the top, as opposed to the stuff that appeals purely to our most baseline animalistic impulses of either anger or satisfaction, or all of these other type of mindless dopamine feelings, instead of what intellectually stimulates us. Because that ultimately is what the human project is trying to build that intellect, as opposed to trying to cater to the animal. But at the same time, you don't necessarily fully neglect it. They have to coexist, but we should be trying to be more evolved than what we came from. That's what we've been doing for the last 5,000 years, 10,000 years, 30,000 years. So I would imagine that we probably would want to keep going that way. And so the takeaways from this video should be, if you have an idea and you want to follow through on the idea, firstly, you absolutely should, but you should also think about, what other stuff might this idea be like? Is it stuff that, maybe I could learn from how other people have tackled this idea in the past, and maybe that can add an extra dimension to how I see it? Or you could also show me what I should or shouldn't approach with this idea. If it's something like a movie, does your story parallel other stories that have been told before? Granted, it's probably going to, at the most base denominator, parallel every single story, if you want to get all Joseph Campbell about it. But if you want to focus more genre-oriented, if you want to make a sci-fi movie, it's like, okay, well, is it like Star Wars? Or are you going to try and do something different from Star Wars? Because there's like 40 of those movies, and they're kind of oversaturating the genre at this point. So whatever idea you have inside the sci-fi space, it better be different from that. And all of this, at the end of the day, comes down from just asking yourself why. And you don't ask yourself why in the nihilistic what's the point kind of way. You do it in the considerate way of, I know I'm going to be asking for people's time. I know I have no right to people's time. So how can I make it the most interesting to try and get people to give me their time? On top of also, if people give me their time, will it be something that is truly worthwhile? It might not necessarily be in that moment, but maybe years down the road, it might hit them over the back of the head in a way that they would never even understand. A lot of art is like that for me too. Or is it something that ultimately is just, I want people to pay attention to me because yippee-ki-yay, I love when people pay attention to me. Attention is worthless unless you have a reason for it. A lot of people's reason for attention is to make money. And, I guess fucking kudos to them. But if you are trying to make art, and granted, none of us want to be the tree that falls in the woods, but if you are asking for that attention, if you feel a right to that attention, you better damn well have a good reason for it. And the best way you are going to craft that reason and justification for people to pay attention to you is to ask yourself why. And through asking yourself why and all of the improvements or evolutions that you make to whatever it is you're trying to craft as a result, you're going to be a hell of a lot closer than you would be by just trying to shoot the bullet blindly. So that's why the why is so important. Look at those cups.